My ex-husband sold everything during our divorce, then I showed him something he never expected. The walls of their home once echoed with laughter, but now they were silent. The air between them had turned cold long before the divorce papers arrived. The woman had tried to salvage what remained, clinging to the belief that love could withstand betrayal, but reality had other plans. Her husband had grown distant, his affection replaced by indifference. Late nights at work became frequent, unexplained expenses appeared in their accounts, and whispers in the dark hinted at a truth she refused to acknowledge. When he finally sat across from her at the dining table, the place where they once shared dreams, his voice was void of emotion. "I think it's best if we end this," he said, sliding the divorce papers across to her. No explanation, no apology, just a cold, transactional exchange that shattered the last of her illusions. She stared at the documents, her hands trembling as she traced the printed words. It wasn't just an end to their marriage, it was an end to the life she had built alongside him. Every holiday spent together, every promise whispered in the night, reduced to a few pages filled with legal jargon. He, on the other hand, seemed unaffected. There was no hesitation, no sign of remorse. He had already moved on in his mind, leaving her behind like an afterthought. She wanted to ask why, wanted to demand when he had stopped loving her, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Instead, she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and whispered, "Fine." If he wanted freedom, she would give it to him, but she refused to crumble. Not in front of him. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and forced smiles. Friends whispered their condolences, telling her she was better off. Her lawyer reassured her that she would be protected, that fairness would be ensured. But beneath the surface, unease coiled in her stomach. Her husband had always been meticulous, always a step ahead. Why was he so calm? Why wasn't he fighting for more? That question haunted her at night, lingering in the silence he had left behind. It wasn't until she began reviewing their financial statements that the first crack in the facade appeared. Her accounts had been touched. The savings they had built together, the assets she had assumed were secured, were suddenly missing or transferred. The house they lived in was still listed in their names, but something was off. Records showed transactions she hadn't approved, sales she never authorized. Her breath hitched as realization dawned. He wasn't leaving her with nothing by accident. He was orchestrating it. She confronted him that same evening, standing in the doorway of the home they still shared, though now as strangers. He looked up from his laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in his indifferent eyes. "You sold the lake house?" she demanded, gripping the document she had found in their files. His lips twitched slightly, not in guilt, but amusement. "I needed liquidity," he replied casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "Without telling me?" she spat, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He sighed, leaning back against his chair. It was going to be split in the divorce anyway. "I thought it would be more efficient this way." Efficient. That was the word he used to describe erasing years of memories, the summer evenings spent on that porch, the laughter that once filled that space. It was nothing more than an asset to him, a transaction. "And the money? Where is it?" Her voice was tight, controlled. He didn't even bother lying. "Reinvested," he said smoothly, standing up as if the conversation bored him. "You're still getting your half of what's left." "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The word stung. She had sacrificed for this marriage, stood by him when his business struggled, held things together when he was lost. And now, she was the dramatic one? She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something just to see if she could break through his indifference. But she knew better. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Instead, she turned away, swallowing the fury that burned inside her. She wouldn't cry, not in front of him. But as she walked back to her room, a single thought settled in her mind: this wasn't over. The legal proceedings moved faster than she expected. Her lawyer, a kind but cautious man, advised her to fight for her rightful share. "You're entitled to half," he reminded her during their meetings, his voice measured. "But I need you to be prepared. He's hiding something." She already knew that. She could feel it in the way her ex-husband carried himself, in the smugness that never wavered. He thought he had already won. Then, a week before their final hearing, she received a call that confirmed her suspicions. "Ma'am, I'm calling about the property auction," the voice on the line said. Her heart skipped a beat. "What auction?" she asked, gripping the phone. Silence followed before the man hesitantly continued, "Your husband sold 3 of your joint properties in a private deal. The paperwork is being finalized now." Her blood turned cold. He had stripped her of everything: homes, investments, even personal belongings that had sentimental value. And he had done it quietly, ensuring that by the time she realized, it would be too late. She ended the call, numb with rage. He thought he was untouchable. He thought she was weak, that she would roll over and accept his betrayal. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Her lawyer worked tirelessly to stop the transactions, but the damage had already been done. Most of the sales were finalized before the court could intervene, he admitted, his face grim. "But there is one last asset under your name that he couldn't touch without your signature." She straightened in her chair, grasping onto the thin sliver of hope. "What is it?" He pushed a document toward her. "A small investment property, nothing major. But here's the interesting part: it's connected to a development project that recently gained significant value." Her fingers tightened around the paper. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something was all she needed. While her ex-husband celebrated his victory, she quietly reached out to financial advisors, lawyers, and investors. If he thought he had won, he was mistaken. The game was far from over. Weeks passed, and the divorce was finalized. The settlement was laughable compared to what she had lost, but she signed the papers with steady hands, refusing to give him the pleasure of seeing her defeated. He smirked as they walked out of the courthouse, standing beside his new fiancée, a younger woman who wore expensive jewelry that had once belonged to her. "No hard feelings," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. She met his gaze and smiled. "None at all," she replied smoothly, turning on her heel and walking away. What he didn't know was that the property he had overlooked, the one she still owned, was about to become worth more than everything he had stolen combined. And soon, he would realize just how big of a mistake he had made. She would make sure of it. The realization of what had happened struck her fully when she returned to what was once her home. The key, which had fit perfectly for years, now met resistance. Confused, she tried again, but the lock had been changed. She knocked, but no answer came. Her heart pounded as she stepped back, only to see a for sale sign planted firmly in the front yard. He hadn't even given her time to collect her things, everything she owned was still inside. She called him, her voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. "You changed the locks?" she asked, forcing calmness into her tone. He chuckled, as if amused by her disbelief. "It's not your house anymore," he said casually. The sale went through last week. The words cut deep. She had lost not just a house, but the memories, the security, the life she had built. And he had tossed it away without a second thought. With nowhere to go, she turned to her lawyer, hoping for some legal recourse, but his expression told her what she already feared. He structured everything carefully, he admitted. He sold off assets before the court could intervene. Legally, there's little we can do now. She gripped the edge of the desk, her nails digging into the wood. So, that's it? He takes everything, and I walk away with nothing? Her lawyer hesitated before pulling out another file. Not exactly. There's one thing he didn't touch, a minority stake in an upcoming development project. He must have overlooked it because it wasn't worth much at the time. She frowned, flipping through the documents. It was small, almost insignificant. But it was hers. And after everything, she would make sure it became something greater than he could ever imagine. She ran into him at a charity gala a week later, a place they had once attended as a couple. He was there with his new fiancée, his hand resting possessively on her waist. When their eyes met, his smirk was unmistakable. I hope you're adjusting, he said smoothly, sipping from his glass. Starting from zero must be quite the challenge for someone like you. His fiancée giggled beside him, whispering something she couldn't hear. Anger flared in her chest, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she smiled. It's funny, she said, tilting her head. You were always good at selling things, but you never knew how to value them. His smirk faltered for just a second, barely noticeable, but enough for her to see the flicker of uncertainty. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him to wonder what she meant. News of his extravagant spending spread quickly. Lavish vacations, a new luxury apartment, expensive gifts for his fiancée, he flaunted his wealth without restraint. But whispers followed. Business associates murmured about his reckless decisions, questioning his judgment. At a high-profile event, an investor confronted him. I heard you liquidated everything. Risky move. What happens if the market turns? The color drained from his face. She watched from across the room, sipping her wine. He had always been arrogant, always believed himself untouchable. But now, doubt crept into his posture. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way he forced a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had made a mistake. And soon, she would ensure that realization turned into regret. The final blow came in the form of a phone call. His biggest deal, the one he had poured everything into, had fallen through. The buyer backed out, the funds dried up, and suddenly, his wealth wasn't as infinite as he had believed. When she saw him next, he looked different, less sure of himself, less composed. You seem distracted, she said, feigning concern. He forced a smile, but she could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But the moment that satisfied her most came when his fiancée, once so enamored by his wealth, turned cold. I didn't sign up for financial trouble, she snapped during a heated argument at another gala. The room went silent as she stormed off, leaving him standing alone, exposed. He glanced around, searching for support, but found none. He was unraveling, and she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As she watched his world begin to crumble, she knew it was time to solidify her own path forward. She reached out to a trusted financial advisor, someone she had worked with briefly in the past. I need to know exactly what I have left, she said, pushing the paperwork across the table. He studied the documents, his expression shifting as he flipped through the pages. "This investment, it's worth far more than you think." Her breath caught. "How much more?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked up, his eyes gleaming with opportunity. "Enough to turn the tables." The project her ex-husband had overlooked had skyrocketed in value due to an unforeseen corporate expansion in the area. What had once been a forgotten asset was now a golden opportunity. And this time, she would play her cards right. Determined to regain her footing, she combed through every document related to their divorce, searching for any detail her ex-husband might have missed. Late one evening, as she sifted through endless pages, a clause caught her eye, one that had gone unnoticed by him and his high-priced lawyers. It stated that if any jointly owned property was undervalued during division, the wronged party had a right to contest it. Her heart pounded. The investment property he had dismissed as worthless was now worth millions, meaning the terms of their divorce settlement could be challenged. She immediately called her lawyer, barely able to contain her excitement. "If we push this," she said, gripping the phone tightly, "we can expose him for manipulating the financial records." Her lawyer chuckled. "Looks like karma's coming sooner than expected." With a plan in place, she moved carefully, gathering evidence and securing the right allies. She met with a team of investors who had been monitoring the same development project, and their enthusiasm was immediate. "This is a prime opportunity," one of them said, shaking her hand. "If you're willing to play it smart, we can turn this into something massive." For the first time in months, she felt power returning to her grasp. Meanwhile, her ex-husband remained blissfully unaware, still clinging to his illusion of financial dominance. At a corporate function, he spoke loudly about his future plans, boasting about upcoming ventures. "You have no idea what's coming next," he said to an associate. She stood in the distance, listening, a knowing smile playing at her lips. No, he had no idea at all. But he would soon. She made her first move by acquiring additional shares in the investment project, strengthening her control. Every meeting, every contract signed, brought her closer to the moment she had been waiting for. The investors saw her as a serious player, not just a woman recovering from a messy divorce. "You're smart," one of them told her. "You're making moves your ex-husband should have made." The irony was delicious. And just as she secured the final deal, news broke of her ex-husband's growing financial troubles. His extravagant spending had caught up to him, and whispers of debt began circulating. His lavish lifestyle was built on unstable ground, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks became unfixable. She had waited for this moment, not for revenge, but for justice. And she was ready to deliver it. A week later, she arranged a discreet meeting with a high-profile investor who had once worked with her ex-husband. "He's in trouble," the man admitted, swirling his drink. "He's burning through money faster than he can make it. I'd be surprised if he lasts another 6 months." She leaned forward, her confidence unwavering. "Then I have an offer you might find interesting," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, one that would undercut her ex-husband's remaining financial leverage. The investor scanned the pages, his expression shifting as he realized what she was doing. "This is bold," he murmured. "And brilliant." She nodded, sipping her wine. "He took everything from me," she said simply. "Now, I'm just taking back what's mine." And with that, the deal was set into motion. The deal was set, but she knew timing was everything. She didn't rush, she let the pressure build around him, watching as he made desperate attempts to maintain his image. He started selling off possessions to keep up with expenses, though he hid it well. His fiancée still draped herself in diamonds, oblivious to the fact that the man she attached herself to was drowning. He had no idea that his downfall had been carefully orchestrated. Her investment, the one he had dismissed as insignificant, had now given her the leverage she needed. A corporate buyout was in progress, one that would shift control of the development project. He had unknowingly tied his financial future to it, believing it worthless when they divorced. But now, as she signed the final documents securing her position, he was about to learn just how wrong he had been. Rumors swirled in the business world. Whispers of his declining wealth, the failed deals, the reckless spending. It was only a matter of time before the truth became public. At an upscale dinner party, she watched from across the room as his forced smile faltered. An investor approached him, speaking in hushed tones. His face stiffened, his grip tightening around his glass. He was starting to realize something was terribly wrong. She had positioned herself carefully, making sure she wasn't just another bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. No, she was now a force in the corporate world, someone people took seriously. And as she sipped her drink, watching him shift uncomfortably under the weight of his own arrogance, she knew he was about to face a reality he never imagined, one where she held all the power. The morning headlines sealed his fate. Major development project acquired by new investors, and her name was listed among them. His phone rang endlessly as former business partners demanded answers. He stormed into his office, slamming the newspaper onto his desk. How the hell did this happen? He barked at his assistant. But there was no stopping it. She had legally and strategically positioned herself where he once stood. She didn't wait for him to come to her, she made sure he had to. When his lawyer requested a meeting, she agreed, choosing the most extravagant venue possible. When he walked in, she saw it, the panic hidden beneath his usual arrogance. "You set this up," he accused, his voice lower than usual. She leaned back, amusement dancing in her eyes. "No," she corrected, "you did, the moment you underestimated me." His downfall accelerated faster than even she anticipated. The financial hole he had dug himself into was deeper than he realized. With his business reputation in shambles and investors pulling out, he was left scrambling. He sold his luxury apartment, let go of his prized car, but it wasn't enough. The world he had built on deception and greed was collapsing, piece by piece. Meanwhile, she thrived. The business community admired her tenacity, her ability to turn misfortune into opportunity. She wasn't just the woman scorned, she was a strategist, a visionary. And as she sat in her new office, looking over the city skyline, she knew one thing for certain, she had won. But she wasn't finished yet. With everything he had lost, there was still one thing left to take, the house he had so easily sold out from under her. It was being auctioned, and she made sure to be the highest bidder. The day she signed the final paperwork, securing ownership once more, she felt the weight of every betrayal lift from her shoulders. This wasn't just about property. This was about reclaiming her life. He found out when he arrived at the house, only to see her standing at the front door, the keys in her hand. His face paled as realization hit him. "You can't be serious," he muttered. She smiled, stepping aside as the new locks clicked into place. "Oh, but I am," she said smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a home to decorate." And with that, she walked inside, leaving him standing in the cold. The whispers turned into headlines. His financial empire, once so untouchable, had crumbled in plain sight. The same people who had once clung to his every word now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with failure. She watched as his downfall played out in slow motion, each misstep another nail in the coffin of his arrogance. But what truly sent shockwaves was the moment her name appeared where his once did, on the very business deals he had taken for granted. At an exclusive industry gala, she arrived in a designer gown, radiating confidence. The murmurs began the moment she stepped inside. He was there, barely keeping up appearances, his suit no longer tailored, his watch less extravagant. When their eyes met across the room, she simply raised her glass. The realization dawned in his eyes, she had taken back everything he had stolen and more. She had become the person he had always pretended to be. He tried to salvage what was left, scrambling to piece together a last-minute investment to keep himself afloat. But desperation wasn't an attractive look, and his once loyal business partners saw him for what he truly was, a man who had built his fortune on deception rather than skill. "I just need time," he insisted during a meeting, but the response was a cold, final shake of the head. The doors that had once opened effortlessly for him were now slammed shut. His fiancée, who had once clung to his arm with pride, started to distance herself. The gifts had stopped, the vacations were cancelled, and the shine in her eyes had faded. "I didn't sign up for this," she said one evening, staring at him across their increasingly empty apartment. He didn't respond, just clenched his jaw. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to understand what it felt like to lose everything. The news of his bankruptcy spread like wildfire. Industry blogs dissected his missteps, while former associates shared stories of his arrogance. Even those who had once admired him now mocked his recklessness. "He thought he was invincible," one commentator noted. Turns out, he was just another man who mistook luck for talent. His name, once associated with power, had become a cautionary tale. She watched from afar, knowing that while he had fallen, she had risen. But the most satisfying moment came when she overheard a conversation at an event, two investors discussing their latest business move. "I wouldn't have touched that project if she wasn't involved," one of them said. "She knows what she's doing." Her chest swelled with quiet pride. He had spent years underestimating her, and now, the world had finally recognized her worth. He had always believed that money could buy loyalty, but now that it was gone, so were the people who once surrounded him. His fiancée packed her things without hesitation, leaving only a short note behind, "I need someone stable." Friends stopped returning his calls, former business partners ignored his emails, and even his lawyer, once eager to fight on his behalf, withdrew from his case. When he walked into a restaurant where he was once greeted with admiration, all he received were sideways glances and hushed whispers. A former acquaintance sneered as he passed. "Thought you were untouchable, huh?" The humiliation burned deep, but there was no one left to defend him. He had made his choices, and now, he had to live with them. She didn't expect to run into him, but fate had a cruel sense of humor. He was sitting at the bar of an upscale hotel, looking exhausted, his shirt slightly wrinkled, a stark contrast to the polished man he used to be. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes, regret, anger, maybe both. "You did this," he muttered as she approached, his voice tinged with bitterness. She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "No," she said evenly. "You did this to yourself." He scoffed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You think you've won?" he asked, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. She leaned in slightly, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't have to win," she replied. "I just had to show you what happens when you underestimate the wrong person." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of his own downfall. The final blow came not from whispers or public disgrace, but from something far more tangible, legal action. With the loophole she had discovered in their divorce settlement, she filed a claim that exposed his financial deception. It wasn't just about taking back what was rightfully hers, it was about holding him accountable for every lie, every underhanded move he had made. The case moved quickly, his fraudulent asset transfers leaving little room for defense. When he was served the legal papers, he laughed bitterly, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, tossing the documents onto the table. His lawyer, however, was less dismissive. "They have enough evidence to bury you," he said, rubbing his temples. His voice was cold, impersonal, another sign that even those who once worked for him saw him as a sinking ship. His empire had already crumbled, but now, the consequences were truly setting in. Within weeks, the courts ruled in her favor. His remaining assets, once hidden behind legal loopholes, were frozen and repossessed. The luxury car he had clung to as a final symbol of his success was towed from his building as onlookers watched. His penthouse, the last remnant of his wealth, was stripped from him. For years, he had believed himself untouchable, but now, he was powerless, forced to witness the dismantling of his own greed. She didn't attend the final court ruling, but she read the reports. His arrogance had shattered completely, no more smug smiles, no more dismissive remarks. The man who once ridiculed her, who sold everything without her knowledge, now had nothing of his own left. The poetic justice wasn't lost on her. He had spent so much time trying to erase her from his life, only to find himself erased instead. With the final legal battle behind her, she focused on building the life she had always deserved. The business ventures she had secured continued to thrive, bringing in new opportunities she never imagined. But it wasn't just about financial success. For the first time in years, she felt free, not burdened by resentment, not haunted by what she had lost. She was no longer the woman defined by her ex-husband's betrayal. She was stronger, wiser, and in complete control. She spent her days investing in projects that mattered to her, mentoring other women who had faced similar struggles. Every step forward was a reminder that she had rebuilt her life not out of revenge, but out of resilience. And when she walked through the doors of her new home, the one she had chosen for herself, she knew this was truly hers. No one could take it away. He had vanished from the social circles he once dominated. Without money or influence, he was just another man scrambling to survive. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him working at a mid-level corporate job, nothing close to the high-powered executive he once was. "He's different now," they said. Quieter. Less sure of himself. She didn't feel pity, nor did she feel satisfaction. He had made his choices, and life had responded accordingly. What mattered was that she had risen from the ashes. People who once doubted her now sought her advice, investors respected her decisions, and those who had mocked her downfall now admired her strength. The lesson was clear: true power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from knowing your worth, from standing tall even when the world tried to bring you down. And she had done just that. One afternoon, as she walked through the city streets, she passed by a cafe where she and her ex-husband had once shared countless conversations about the future. He was sitting at a corner table, alone, staring blankly at his coffee. He looked up and their eyes met for the briefest of moments. There was no anger in his gaze, no bitterness, only quiet recognition. He finally understood what he had lost. She offered a small, knowing smile before walking away, her head held high. She didn't need an apology, didn't need closure, she had already won. Not because she had destroyed him, but because she had rebuilt herself. Her past no longer defined her. Her future was hers alone, and for the first time in a long time, it was exactly where she wanted to be.